The day my parents handed my brother the keys to their $1 million home, they slid me a deed to a dead land and called it fair. That same night, my wife packed her bags and walked out. I drove across the country planning to sell the land and erase the humiliation, until a surveyor looked at me and said something that made my hands start shaking. Before I go any further, stay with me for a moment, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and follow along. Stories like this don't move unless someone listens. My parents' house sat on a bluff overlooking the water, glass windows catching the late afternoon sun like it was designed to impress the sky itself. We were all gathered in the living room, the same one where every holiday had revolved around my brother. Lucas sat forward on the couch, already smiling, already certain the outcome would land in his favor. I stayed back, arms crossed, pretending I didn't feel the tension tightening my chest. My father cleared his throat. "We've finalized everything," he said. "We want to handle this while we're still around." My mother nodded, eyes fixed on Lucas. "Lucas," my father continued, sliding a thick folder across the coffee table, "this house is yours. We want it kept in the family. You've earned it." Lucas didn't even hesitate. He picked up the folder, opened it, and let out a quiet laugh like someone who had just won something they always knew was theirs. My mother hugged him, already talking about renovations and grandchildren. Then my father turned toward me. "Daniel," he said, pushing a much thinner folder in my direction, "your grandfather left you the land." The land. I opened the folder slowly. A single deed. 40 acres in a rural county most people only knew from highway signs. A farm abandoned so long weeds had replaced memory. No congratulations. No explanation. Just paper. I looked up, waiting for something else. There was nothing. On the drive home, the silence in the car was heavier than traffic. My wife, Marissa, stared out the window until she finally spoke. "So that's it," she said. "Your brother gets everything, and we get nothing." "It's land," I replied, even as doubt crawled into my voice. "We can sell it. Maybe it's worth." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Worth what?" "Daniel, I married someone with plans. Not someone tied to a worthless farm in the middle of nowhere." At home, she didn't even sit down. She paced while I stood there holding the deed like it might explain itself. "This isn't what I signed up for," she said. "I didn't sacrifice my future to be second place forever." Second place. That night, she packed a suitcase. By morning, half the closet was empty. Watching her leave hurt more than losing the house ever could. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself I'd sell the land, take whatever it was worth, and start over somewhere no one knew me or compared me to my brother. So I drove. The city thinned into highways, then roads, then long stretches of nothing. When I finally reached the property, my stomach sank. The farmhouse leaned like it was tired of standing. Fences sagged. The barn roof caved inward. The fields were cracked and dry, as if even the soil had given up. This was what my family thought I deserved. I sat in my truck and called a local land agent. He didn't hesitate. "If you want it gone fast," he said, "you're looking at a few thousand. Maybe. Hunting land, if someone's interested. Farming? No chance. A few $1,000s. My brother had been handed a house worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. I was holding dirt everyone agreed was useless. The next morning, I met the surveyor. His name was Mark, quiet, older, the kind of man who spoke only when he meant it. He shook my hand and scanned the property longer than I expected. "You sure you want to sell?" he asked. "Yes," I said immediately. "I just want it over with." He nodded but didn't look convinced. As he worked, I walked the land alone. Memories of my grandfather surfaced, silent, stubborn, refusing to sell no matter who asked. I'd always thought he was clinging to nothing. That night, sitting in the farmhouse with the wind rattling the windows, my phone rang. It was Lucas. "So," he said casually, "how's life as a farmer?" I ended the call without answering. I didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath my feet was hiding something no one else had bothered to look for. And when Mark finished his report, everything my family believed about value, and about me, was going to collapse. I barely slept that night. The farmhouse creaked with every shift of the wind, wood popping like tired bones. I lay on the old mattress staring at the ceiling, replaying everything, Lucas's grin, my parents' careful words, Marissa's suitcase rolling across the floor. Every memory stacked on top of the next until my chest felt too tight to breathe. At dawn, I gave up on sleep and stepped outside. Mist hovered low over the fields, softening the ugliness of the broken fences and cracked soil. For a moment, the land almost looked peaceful. Almost forgiving. Then the sun crept higher, and the truth returned, dry ground, weeds choking everything, no signs of life. I told myself this was just one more disappointment to survive. Mark arrived just after 8. His truck kicked up gravel as it rolled into the driveway. He stepped out with his equipment, nodded once, and got to work without much conversation. I followed at a distance, hands shoved into my pockets, watching him measure boundaries, drive stakes, and mark coordinates. Hours passed in silence. At one point, he stopped near the tree line and crouched, brushing dirt away with his hand. His brow furrowed. He scooped soil into a bag, sealed it carefully, and wrote something on the label I couldn't read. My stomach tightened. "Is something wrong?" I asked. He glanced up. Too early to say. That answer didn't help. By afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Your father and I hope you're not making rash decisions. Lucas is already planning improvements on the house." I stared at the message, then locked my phone without replying. Later, another call came. This time, from Marissa. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Her voice sounded softer than it had the night she left. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "I was just scared. Call me when you're ready." I deleted it. Fear had been her excuse for walking away. I wasn't obligated to carry that fear anymore. Mark stayed until sunset. He loaded his tools, wiped his hands on a rag, and looked at me with something unreadable in his eyes. "I'll have the full report in 2 days," he said. "Soil analysis, mineral survey, records. Everything." 2 days, I repeated. He hesitated. "You might want to hold off on calling that agent until then." That caught my attention. "Why?" Mark studied me for a long second. "Just, trust me." That night, I drove into town for food. The diner was small, worn, the kind of place where everyone noticed when a stranger walked in. Conversations paused as I took a seat at the counter. "You're Earl's grandson, aren't you?" the waitress asked, pouring coffee before I answered. I nodded. She smiled faintly. "He was a hard man. But he loved that land." "Everyone says the land's worthless," I replied. She snorted softly. "Worthless things don't attract buyers every year for 20 years. I froze. "Buyers?" "Oh yeah," she said casually. "Out-of-state folks. Suits. Grandpa Earl never sold. Said some things were worth more buried than exposed." The words followed me all the way back to the farmhouse. Worth more buried than exposed. That night, Lucas called again. I answered this time. "You still out there?" he asked. "Mom's worried." "I'm fine," I said. He chuckled. "Look, when you're done pretending, you can come back. I'll help you get on your feet." "I don't need your help," I replied. A pause. Then his voice sharpened. "You always say that. And look where it's gotten you." I hung up without another word. The next morning, I walked the land again. I paid attention this time, to the way certain areas stayed greener, to odd stone patterns near the creek, to how the ground felt firmer in some spots than others. For the first time, doubt crept in, not about myself, but about everything I'd been told. Mark arrived on the third morning. He didn't smile. "Daniel," he said, holding a thick folder, "we need to talk." My heart started pounding. We sat on the porch, the folder between us like a loaded weapon. "I double-checked everything," he said. "Ran independent tests. Pulled old records." "And?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "Your land isn't dead." I stared at him. "It's one of the most mineral-rich plots I've surveyed in this region," he continued. "Rare earth deposits. Deep, concentrated, valuable." My mouth went dry. "You're telling me, this land is worth something?" Mark met my eyes. "I'm telling you it's worth a fortune." The porch felt like it tilted beneath me. "I thought you should hear it from me before anyone else," he added. "Because once this gets out, things are going to change fast." Images flooded my mind, Marissa walking out, Lucas laughing, my parents sliding that thin folder toward me like a consolation prize. Grandpa Earl hadn't been stubborn. He'd been guarding something. And he'd left it to me. I didn't celebrate. I didn't laugh. I just sat there, hands trembling, realizing that everything I thought I knew about my family, and my place in it, had been wrong. Mark closed the folder. "What you do next," he said quietly, "will matter." I looked out over the fields, no longer seeing weeds and decay, but something hidden, waiting. And for the first time since my life unraveled, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief. Control. I didn't call anyone after Mark left. Not my parents. Not Lucas. Not Marissa. I stayed on the porch long after his truck disappeared down the gravel road, the folder heavy on my lap, the words echoing in my head like something I wasn't allowed to believe yet. A fortune. I'd spent my entire life being told, directly or quietly, that I was the practical one. The dependable one. The one who didn't need much because I wasn't built for more. And now I was sitting on land my family had dismissed like trash, land my wife had used as an excuse to walk away. Grandpa Earl hadn't been cruel. He'd been precise. I opened the folder again, slower this time. Maps. Geological charts. Long columns of numbers that meant nothing to me but clearly meant everything to someone who understood them. Mark's notes were neat, cautious, underlined in places where certainty mattered. Confirmed deposits. Extraction viable. Estimated valuation pending permits. Pending permits. That was the catch. The land was valuable, but only if I didn't rush, didn't brag, didn't let someone else take control before I understood what I had. I stayed on the farm for another week, barely sleeping, barely eating. Every day, I walked the property with new eyes. Places I'd once ignored now felt charged. The shallow creek near the tree line. The ridge Grandpa used to insist we keep clear. The patch of land he never let anyone dig into deeper than a foot. He'd known. He hadn't told my parents. He hadn't told Lucas. He hadn't told me. He trusted me to find it when I was ready. On the 5th day, my father called. "Daniel," he said, skipping pleasantries. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "We heard from Lucas that you had the land surveyed." "I did." "And?" His voice tightened. "Is it really worth anything?" I pictured him standing in that coastal living room, sunlight bouncing off glass and polished floors, asking about dirt he'd never respected. "It's worth more than you thought," I said carefully. A pause. "How much more?" my mother asked, her voice joining the call. "Enough that I'm not selling it," I replied. Silence. Then my father laughed. "Don't be stubborn. You don't know how these things work. If there's any value, we should handle it together." Handle it together. The same people who'd handed my brother a house and me a problem suddenly wanted unity. "I'll manage it," I said. "You're being emotional," my mother snapped. "This isn't about feelings." "No," I replied calmly. "It's about ownership." The call ended cold. 2 hours later, Lucas showed up. I watched his car pull into the drive from the farmhouse window. Clean. Polished. Completely out of place. He stepped out wearing sunglasses and a smirk, like he was arriving to fix a mess. "Didn't think you'd stay," he said as I met him outside. "Place smells like regret." "What do you want?" I asked. He shrugged. "Mom and Dad are worried." "And honestly? So am I. You don't know what you're doing." I crossed my arms. "Funny. You didn't care when you thought it was worthless." His smile faltered for half a second. "So it's true," he said. "There's something here." "Enough," I replied. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Look, I can help you. I know people. Investors. Lawyers. We could split it." "Split it." The word tasted bitter. "Grandpa didn't leave it to you," I said quietly. "He didn't leave it to you because you were special," Lucas snapped. "He left it because you were the only one dumb enough to take it." I looked at him then, really looked. At the expensive watch. The confidence built on approval. The man who'd never had to wait for anything. "Get off my land," I said. His face hardened. "You'll regret this." "Maybe," I replied. "But it won't be today." He left without another word, tires spinning gravel as he pulled away. That night, I locked every door and slept with the folder beside me. The calls started the next morning. Unknown numbers. Voicemails left without names. Interested parties. Consultants. People who somehow already knew. Mark had been right. Once the truth surfaced, it moved fast. I hired an attorney in the nearest city, someone who didn't know my family, didn't care about history. She read through the documents twice, then leaned back in her chair. "You've been underestimated," she said. "That works in your favor. But only if you stay quiet and patient." So I did. I declined offers. Ignored pressure. Let rumors swirl without confirmation. And watched as my family's tone changed. My mother stopped sounding disappointed and started sounding afraid. My father stopped advising and started asking. Lucas stopped mocking and started negotiating. Marissa called again. This time, I answered. "I heard you didn't sell the land," she said carefully. "I didn't." A pause. "Daniel, maybe we should talk in person." "Why now?" I asked. "Because things change," she replied. I looked out at the fields, golden in the late afternoon light. "Yes," I said. "They do." But I didn't invite her out. Instead, I stood on the porch and made another decision. I wasn't going to become what they expected. I wasn't going to rush toward money the way they rushed toward approval. I was going to do this slowly. On my terms. Because Grandpa Earl hadn't just left me land. He'd left me time. And the patience to use it was the real inheritance. The first official offer arrived on a Tuesday morning, printed on thick paper and delivered by courier like it was afraid of the mailbox. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee, sat at the old kitchen table, and stared at the envelope while the farmhouse creaked around me. The place still smelled like dust and would rot, but something about it felt different now, less abandoned, more patient. Like it had been waiting. When I finally opened the letter, the number nearly made me laugh. It was high enough to change my life. High enough that 6 months ago I would have signed without reading past the second line. But it was also low enough to insult Grandpa Earl. I folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and set it aside. By noon, there were 3 more. Different companies. Different wording. Same urgency. Everyone wanted the land quickly. Quietly. Cheaply. That told me everything. I called my attorney, Helen, and read the numbers out loud. She didn't sound surprised. "They're testing you," she said. "Seeing how fast you'll blink." "I won't," I replied. "I know," she said. "But be ready. When you don't bite, the tone will change." She was right. Within a week, the calls stopped pretending to be friendly. Emails became aggressive. Deadlines appeared out of nowhere. Warnings about zoning, permits, environmental reviews, problems that hadn't existed before suddenly loomed large and urgent. Someone wanted me scared. Someone wanted me rushed. That someone turned out to be my own brother. Lucas didn't call this time. He showed up again. I was repairing a fence near the south field when I heard his car. I didn't look up right away. I let him stand there, watching me work, sweat soaking through my shirt. "You've made your point," he said finally. I kept hammering. "You're embarrassing Mom and Dad," he added. I stopped then, leaned on the post, and wiped my hands on my jeans. "You embarrassed them when you thought I'd fail," I said. "Now you're just uncomfortable." His jaw tightened. "You don't know how this world works." "I'm learning," I replied. "You're playing with people who don't lose," he warned. I met his eyes. Neither did Grandpa. That landed harder than I expected. Lucas flinched, just barely. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "Sell part of it. Keep enough to feel proud. Let the rest go before you mess this up." I shook my head. "You still don't get it." "What? This isn't about money." He laughed sharply. "Everything's about money." "No," I said. "This is about who was trusted." He went quiet. "You weren't," I continued. "And neither were Mom and Dad." Lucas stepped back like I'd pushed him. "That's not true." "It is," I said calmly. Grandpa knew exactly how this would play out. He knew who would rush, who would panic, and who would try to take control. "And you think you're special?" he snapped. "I think I'm patient," I replied. He stared at me for a long moment, then scoffed. "You always did think suffering made you noble." "No," I said. "But it made me careful." He left without another word. 2 days later, my parents came. Both of them. They hadn't set foot on the farm in over 20 years. My mother wore city shoes that sank into the dirt. My father kept glancing around like the land might accuse him. "This place is dangerous," my mother said immediately. "Structurally. Environmentally. You shouldn't be here alone." "I'm fine," I replied. "We raised you better than this," my father said, frustration creeping into his voice. "You're being stubborn for no reason." "For a reason," I corrected. They followed me into the house, wrinkling their noses, ignoring the repairs I'd started. "We want to help," my mother said softly now. "But you're shutting us out." I looked at her, really looked. "You shut me out first," I said. "This is just later." She opened her mouth, then closed it. My father exhaled slowly. "If there's money here," he said, choosing his words carefully, "it should benefit the family." "It will," I replied. Hope flickered in his eyes. "Just not the way you expect." That night, after they left, I sat on the porch and thought about Grandpa. About how often he'd let silence do the talking. So I followed his example. I stopped responding to pressure. I let Helen handle communications. I waited. And then the real offer came. It arrived not by courier, but by invitation. A private meeting. Neutral location. No paperwork up front. Helen raised an eyebrow when I showed her the email. "This is where power shifts," she said. "Go. But listen more than you talk." The meeting took place in a quiet office overlooking a river. The man across from me was calm, confident, and careful in the way people are when they know they don't need to rush. "You've been underestimated," he said, echoing Helen's words. That made this interesting. He slid a folder across the table. The number inside was staggering. Not just life-changing. Generational. I didn't react. "That's contingent on full mineral rights," he continued. "No delays. No public noise." I leaned back. "No." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated. "I'm not selling everything." He studied me, reassessing. "Most people don't say no to that figure." "I'm not most people," I replied. "What do you want?" he asked. I thought of Grandpa Earl, standing in these fields, knowing what lay beneath, refusing to explain himself. "I want control," I said. "Phased development. Environmental oversight. Local investment. And transparency." He smiled slowly. You've done your homework. I've lived my whole life being told what things were worth, I said. I'm done outsourcing that. The negotiation lasted hours. When I walked out, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from realization. I hadn't just protected the land. I'd claimed it. News travels fast when money is involved. By the end of the week, everyone knew I hadn't sold outright. By the end of the month, everyone knew I wouldn't. The tone shifted again. Now it wasn't pressure. It was respect. Lucas stopped calling. My parents stopped advising. Marissa showed up unannounced one evening, standing at the edge of the porch like she didn't belong. You look different, she said. So do you, I replied. I made a mistake, she said quietly. I didn't answer. I judged you based on fear, she continued. On what I thought life should look like. I nodded once. You did. She waited, hopeful. But you also chose, I said. And so did I. She left without asking to come inside. The final document was signed 3 months later. Not a sale. A partnership. One that left ownership where it belonged. The day the agreement was finalized, I drove out to the far edge of the property where Grandpa used to sit on an overturned bucket and drink his coffee. I sat there until the sun dipped low, the land glowing gold. They thought he'd left me nothing. They thought he'd punished me. But he'd done something else entirely. He'd given me space. To be overlooked. To be tested. To decide who I was when no one was watching. And now, when everyone was, it was already too late to take it away. Because the ground beneath my feet wasn't just valuable. It was earned. The first machine didn't arrive with noise. No sirens. No press. No celebration. Just a flatbed rolling down a dirt road at sunrise, tires crunching gravel that hadn't been disturbed in decades. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee and watched it come like a visitor who knew it belonged. That was when it finally hit me. This wasn't hypothetical anymore. This wasn't leverage or paperwork or theory. This was real. The land had spoken, and the world was listening. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Lucas. I didn't tell anyone who hadn't earned the right to know. The first people I hired weren't executives or consultants. They were locals. Men and women who'd watched this farm decay for years, who remembered my grandfather turning people away without explanation. They didn't ask why he'd done it. They just nodded and said, Earl always knew something. I built slowly. Intentionally. No rush. No spectacle. Every contract included clauses Grandpa would have approved of: environmental protection, community reinvestment, local jobs before outsiders. Every decision passed one simple test: if he were sitting on that bucket by the fence, would he shake his head or sip his coffee and stay quiet? Silence meant approval. The phone calls changed tone again. This time they weren't asking. They were acknowledging. My parents called one evening, voices measured, careful, like they were speaking to someone they didn't fully recognize anymore. We've been hearing things, my father said. I imagine you have, I replied. You didn't tell us, my mother added. No, I said. I didn't. A pause stretched long enough to feel awkward. We're proud of you, she finally said. I closed my eyes. Not because it meant something. But because it came too late to mean what they thought it would. I'm glad, I replied. But I didn't do this for pride. Another pause. We'd like to visit again, my father offered. To understand what you're building. You can, I said. But not to advise. Not to correct. Just to see. They agreed quickly. Too quickly. When they arrived a week later, the land looked different. Still rough, still honest, but alive. Survey flags dotted the fields. Equipment rested near the barn like it had always belonged there. My mother stood quietly, eyes scanning the horizon. I never imagined, she said softly. That's okay, I replied. You weren't supposed to. Lucas didn't come with them. He waited another month. When he did, he didn't bring jokes or arrogance. He brought paperwork. I want in, he said flatly, sliding a proposal across my table. I didn't look at it. You always do, he continued. This kind of thing, this scale, it needs people like me. I finally met his eyes. No, I said. He frowned. You don't even know what I'm offering. I know who's offering, I replied. That's enough. He leaned back, incredulous. You'd rather do this alone? I'm not alone, I said. I just didn't confuse blood with trust. That landed hard. You think Grandpa trusted you more? He asked. I know he did. He scoffed. Why? I stood and walked him to the window, pointing toward the field where the soil tests had been taken. Because when something looks worthless, you walk away, I said. And when something looks hard, I stay. He stared, silent. I was never the favorite, I continued. But I was the one he left unsupervised. Lucas gathered his papers slowly, anger replaced by something closer to resignation. "You think this makes you better?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "It makes me finished." He left without another word. Marissa tried one last time. She sent a message, carefully worded, full of reflection and regret. She spoke about fear, pressure, expectations. She said she hadn't known how strong I really was. I deleted it without replying. Not out of cruelty. Out of closure. The first public announcement came 6 months later. Not a press conference. A town hall. I stood in a folding chair gymnasium with people who'd known this land longer than I had. I explained what was happening. What wasn't. What would change, and what never would. I promised transparency. I promised restraint. And I promised that no one would wake up one morning to find their home sacrificed for someone else's ambition. When I finished, no one clapped. They stood. That meant more. I bought the old diner in town and reopened it instead of letting a chain take it over. I restored the farmhouse not into a mansion, but into a place that could host people, workers, planners, families. The barn became a training center. The fields stayed fields where they could. Money came. But it didn't lead. It followed. One evening, after everything had settled into rhythm, I sat alone near the fence line where Grandpa used to stand. The land hummed quietly, machines distant, stars overhead. I realized something then. He hadn't given me the farm because I needed it. He'd given it to me because I didn't. Because I could lose everything else and still stay standing. That was the test. The real inheritance wasn't the minerals. It wasn't the leverage or the contracts or the money flowing in steady and controlled. It was the certainty that I'd been trusted when no one else trusted me. That someone had seen me not as second best, but as last resort. As the one who wouldn't rush, wouldn't boast, wouldn't fold. They gave my brother the house because he needed proof. They gave me the land because I didn't. Years from now, people will say I got lucky. They'll say the timing was right. The market aligned. The land happened to be valuable. They won't see the nights I slept on floors, the silence I swallowed, the moments I was dismissed as irrelevant. They won't see Grandpa turning down offers, waiting for someone who could hear what the land was saying without being told. That's fine. Some legacies aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be carried. And I carry mine every day, boots in the dirt, eyes forward, knowing exactly who I am, because when everything else was taken, that was the one thing no one could steal. If you've ever been underestimated and chose patience over noise, let me know where you're watching from, share it with someone who's still waiting for their moment. Stories like this deserve to reach the people who need them most.